The treasure is said to lie somewhere here, the legendary Nazi gold. Here in the Austrian mountains, where the SS intended to fight to the bitter end for survival, in the fabled Alpine Fortress. Nazis scrap, counterfeit banknotes, secret documents, submerged clues, and a sinister underground labyrinth, endless tunnels driven into the rock by slave workers. What really happened here? This film proves for the very first time the Alpine Fortress was no myth. Just a few days were to decide whether the SS would surrender or fight to the end, and to mean life or death for the liberating Allied forces. At the time, there were rumors in the German-occupied area in Tyrol that the Germans wanted to build a huge defensive fortress there, so as to make a final stand, like the last of the Goths. Summer 1944, the beginning of the assault on the Nazi Reich, Allied forces landing in Normandy. Thousands of soldiers lost their lives, but the advance continued. The Germans had lost the war, but the fighting would still continue. Thousands would perish in Allied bombing raids. Total war, returning to the place it began. Even the leaders of the Waffen-SS began to turn away from Hitler, as did some officers of the regular army, the Wehrmacht. On the 20th of July 1944, their attempt to assassinate Hitler failed. Count Klaus Schenk von Stauffenberg and his co-plotters in the Wehrmacht were executed as traitors. Their families were thrown into jail and the disloyal Wehrmacht removed from power. The SS was now the #1 force in Nazi Germany. But even the head of the SS, Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler, no longer believed in final victory, nor in Adolf Hitler, his Führer. Without Hitler's knowledge, he had long been seeking contact with the Western Allies. He sought to make a deal with the Americans, not as a loser, but as a partner. His trump cards? Prominent Jews and other prisoners whom he had been gathering in special concentration camps since December 1942 to use as hostages. Himmler began planning the SS withdrawal to the Alps early on, so as to be able to threaten a bloody and protracted final stand. To that end, in summer 1944, he established a research unit to survey defense lines on the Italian border. His aim? A last bastion, the Alpine Fortress. The SS was to hold out in the mountains until they had forced either successful negotiations or a split among the Allies. The SS had enough power to do this. Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS, was also Minister of the Interior, the head of the German police, and Chief Commander of the military reserves. As head of the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, the secret police headquarters, SS Obergruppenführer Ernst Kaltenbrunner could draw on an almost unlimited number of prisoners in concentration camps. And SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, responsible for armaments and construction, commanded many thousands of slave laborers. The Alpine region, stretching from the foothills in Bavaria to Upper Austria and as far as Tyrol, was ideal terrain for the plans of the SS. In addition to the many strategic advantages of this natural fortress, it had long been the center of a vigorous armaments industry. Many factories had been moved there to avoid damage in bombing raids. The SS purposefully took over control of these structures. Some companies they infiltrated, some they bought with cheap labor from the concentration camps, in others they simply placed their own men in leading positions. The region had a strong tradition of armaments production. Messerschmitt built aeroplanes in Oberammergau. The Munich area produced ammunition, vehicles and weaponry. Above all, there was the center of Austrian armaments production in the area around Linz and Steyr, which the SS was to expand, building underground production sites. Working alongside the SS, the armaments giant Steyr Daimler Puch, BMW producing aero engines, and the aeroplane manufacturer Messerschmitt. Everywhere, miraculous new wonder weapons, or Wunderwaffen, were being developed. These secret research projects now fell under SS control. The construction of a huge wind tunnel for testing fighter planes in the heart of Tyrol's Ötz Valley. Even more menacing was a project codenamed Uranium Association. German scientists working day and night to produce the first atomic bomb. An entire arsenal of high-tech weapons was being tested or even used in battle, such as the Messerschmitt Me-262, the first jet fighter ever produced. The SS hoped it would turn the course of the war. And then there was the V-2 rocket, developed for the army by Werner von Braun in Peenemünde, a terror weapon. Von Braun and his team worked feverishly to improve its efficiency. The SS, who had long sought to gain control of these rockets, were now able to incorporate them into their Alpine Fortress.
Die SS und vor allen Dingen angefangen mit Himmler haben natürlich
the SS and especially Himmler made great efforts to take over the entire Peenemünde plant, but they only succeeded in gaining control over the use and production of V2s.
Einsatz des V2s. In
the end, it was decided to transfer Peenemünde from the island of Usedom to southern Germany. It was to become a part of what was known as the Alpine Fortress.
In dem, was damals bekannt war als Alpenfestung, teilzunehmen.
And it was widely known that the work would be underground, and the initial plan was apparently even to resume V2 production.
Die V2-Produktion dort unten wieder aufzunehmen.
Under the codename Cement, an extensive bomb-proof underworld was cut into the rock of Upper Austria. 8 kilometers long, its caverns up to 20 meters high. It was meant as the new home for Peenemunde's entire research and production, including development of a new intercontinental missile, capable of reaching New York and Chicago. The SS were in a hurry. For Hans Kammler, SS General, this was not a problem. He guaranteed that Tunnel System A would be completed by the 1st of March 1945, by making greater use of prisoners. The Mauthausen concentration camp on the Danube near Linz was not nicknamed Mordhausen or Murderville for nothing. Since 1938, prisoners here were systematically worked to death. Initially, common criminals slaved in the quarries for Hitler's show palaces. Now the SS assembled over 100,000 slaves from other concentration camps to build the Alpine Fortress. Less than half of them were to survive the ordeal.
Man kann sagen, bis
One could say that before summer 1943, certain kinds of prisoners were murdered as quickly as possible. Afterwards, only those who could no longer work were killed or murdered. They tried to keep the others alive for a longer time through appropriate food and treatment.
Längere Zeit durch entsprechende Ernährung und entsprechende Behandlung leben zu lassen.
Now, if the life expectancy of a prisoner had been 6 to 8 months, it then became 12 months. Minor camps were transformed into weapon factories. Tunnels were enlarged. Redl-Zipf was expanded. Beer breweries. Prisoners were ordered and delivered to the different arms factories. There were 23 to 24,000 in Gusen 1 and Gusen 2, 5,600 in the Hermann Göring factories, 17 to 20,000 in Ebensee, 2,000 in Steyr at the Steyr Daimler Puch works.
2000 in Steyr, Daimler Puch in Steyr.
Apart from Mauthausen, prisoners were kept in nearby labor camps, in Münchholz near Steyr Daimler Puch, 3 camps near the Hermann Göring works in Linz. They were often camouflaged with names like Mountain Crystal, as in Gusen 2, near the tank factories in St. Valentin, More than 40 camps across the Danube plain as far as Vienna. Extermination through work everywhere for the benefit of the SS and the profit of the arms industry. One of the largest camps in Ebensee was part of the SS missile project Cement. Several hundred prisoners worked at the Schlier camp in Sipf, just a stone's throw from the Radel brewery. The SS had requisitioned the cellars to build a well-camouflaged arms factory. Instead of beer, liquid oxygen for the V2 rocket was now produced here. Rocket engines were hauled through the tunnels to be calibrated. Prisoners poured concrete for the metre-thick walls behind which the rockets were tested. The young Frenchman, Paul Leclerc, had been arrested by the Gestapo as a resistance fighter. He ended up building bunkers at Schlier labor camp.
Le travail était pénible puisque nous travaillions 12
The work was hard, 12 hours a shift, day or night.
et chacun de nous
None of us had much to eat, not even a bowl of soup at night.
même pas de soupe au milieu de la nuit. Un jour, il y avait une plateforme en bois.
There was wooden scaffolding above the wall. One day it collapsed.
S'est écroulé.
3 of our comrades fell into the wet concrete, but we were able to pull them out.
Était tombé dans le béton mou et on a vu disparaître notre ami.
There was one whom we couldn't help. To his last breath, he was screaming for help.
Il demandait de l'aide.
His sister lives in France. He is still lying here today.
Il y a le corps d'un Français dont sa sœur vit encore en France.
The SS chiefs all gathered, eager to see the ignition of the first rocket engine. Viewing platforms were built. The prisoners were allowed to watch too.
Tout le monde nazi qui était là.
All the Nazi top brass were there, applauding.
Donc, il y avait
Gauleiter, Eigruber and Kammler, all of them were there. They had their big appearance, and we were very sad that
Et
night.
nous, ce soir-là, nous étions très tristes.
The activities of the SS were soon discovered by American intelligence. In autumn 1944, agents began reporting military activities and preparations between Mittenwald and Seefeld in Tyrol, and noted troop movements in the Garmisch-Partenkirchen area. Alarming reports reached the desk of US intelligence chief Alan Welsh Dulles in Bern, Switzerland. Working together with the Americans, members of the Austrian resistance confirmed the reports. Fritz Molden was liaison officer to the Allies.
Da haben sie mich gefragt, was ich davon wusste.
Then they asked me what I knew about it, whether I knew anything about this redoubt, as they called the Nazi mountain fortress. They were very interested in discovering whether I knew if Hitler was building an atomic bomb. That was what the Americans believed at the time. And all about the V2. They also suspected attempts were being made to build rocket bases in some regions of Austria, in case the Allies reached Germany, which was true. I tried to find that out with the help of my friends, all of them members of the Austrian resistance, and I did. Professor Wolfgang Faundler, head of the partisans in the Ötz Valley, gave me details of a wind tunnel being built into the mountainside, allegedly to build atomic bombs or other secret weapons, but also to help construct the Alpine Fortress.
Gleichzeitig aber auch die Alpenfestung auszubauen.
Whilst they proudly stood to attention and cheered, tens of thousands of prisoners were rotting in nearby Ebensee concentration camp, where the cement missile project was being forced along. Day and night, the valley echoed with the sound of explosions. Driven by the SS, the prisoners dug miles of tunnels into the rock. With little protection against the cold and damp, their life expectancy was low. Parts of the Ebensee underworld can still be seen today. Work went on feverishly to the very end. The construction teams couldn't keep up with Kammler's ambitious timetable. Meanwhile, other underground factories had begun operation. There too, prisoners worked under inhuman conditions, producing machine guns, tanks, and the Me-262 jet fighter. A nightmarish maze of bomb shelters runs through the Austrian Alps. Together, the 6 largest complexes are 26 kilometers long. A preliminary US intelligence report from February 1945 confirmed something was brewing, but what was it? Further investigations were needed, especially aerial reconnaissance. Although the Alpine Fortress was arising in full view of the Americans, they did not realize it yet. The SS deployed a further weapon, counterfeit banknotes. A unit which had been forging British pound notes in Sachsenhausen was transferred to the Alpine Fortress on the 13th of February 1945. This so-called Operation Bernhard was led by SS officer Bernhard Krüger and used 142 Jewish printing specialists, including the prisoner Adolf Burger. Our 2 blocks were surrounded by wire. We were, so to speak, inside a golden cage. A gate 3 meters high connected blocks 18 and 19. There was always an SS man on guard outside. The windows were whitewashed so that no one could see inside. We were to start production of dollars. We were to forge $1 million a day. Production never started. The day we were to begin, an order came. Stop working, take the machines apart. They brought 40 coffin-like waterproof boxes, and I started to pack. All the money remaining in the money store. There were millions of pounds sterling in those boxes. Another group disassembled the machines, and we knew this is the end. It was always the same. In our block, all we could think of was death. We didn't believe we would ever get out alive. What we knew was a state secret. Then we were loaded onto 16 wagons, as were the machines and the boxes. Thus we arrived after 3 days and nights. We got out, and one of the prisoners, Smolyanov, one of the best money forgers, the only genuine criminal, or green as we called them, he said, "Now I'm back where I came from." The sign read, Mauthausen. The SS now played a card Himmler had prepared years before, hostages. The castle of Itter near Wörgl in Tyrol was just one of the places where so-called special prisoners were kept. In addition to Jewish hostages, the SS had also seized leading figures from the occupied countries and transported them to the Alps to use as bargaining counters. Among them were prominent French politicians. Under Himmler's orders, hundreds faced an uncertain future. The concentration camp at Dachau became the collection center for special prisoners selected from other camps. They were kept hidden, in strict isolation from the rest of the camp, at a remote building in camp headquarters. One prisoner, transferred from Ravensbrück to Dachau on the Friday, was the priest Karl Kunkel. Then my luggage was searched. Then the next question was where to put me. They had no documents, just my transfer papers, which said that I was a special prisoner and shouldn't be placed in the general camp. In a sense, we were seen as honorable prisoners. At least we had committed no crime in their eyes. So we weren't snarled at, but treated quite properly. There were a lot of interesting names, all the political prisoners, Schuschnigg and so on. And of course those held because of their families, the Stauffenbergs, for example, whom I had heard of course. And the others, Hjalmar Schacht and Kurt Thyssen of the well-known company. Himmler took hostages among the nobility too. Separated from her parents, the young Princess Irmingard of Bavaria underwent an odyssey from Flossenburg to Dachau as one of the special prisoners.
Es war wahnsinnig überfüllt.
It was incredibly overcrowded, and the barracks very dirty. At first we were in one of those barracks and it was full of bedbugs. And outside the windows lay corpses stacked like firewood. The crematorium was quite nearby. One could see people constantly unloading corpses from the trucks or incinerating them. Everything reeked of burning human beings. Really, we were just waiting, expecting to be executed.
Ja, wir haben eigentlich darauf gewartet, hingerichtet zu werden.
On the second weekend of February 1945, the New York Times dropped a bombshell. For the first time, the shocked American public was confronted with news of the last Nazi fortress and the military preparations of the Germans in the Alps. They learned astonishing details of Himmler's hostage plan, names, hiding places. Disturbing news which had to be taken very seriously. Meanwhile, the Aussee region, about 100 kilometers south of Linz, had become a refuge for Nazis. Almost inaccessible, it was an ideal hiding place in the center of the Alpine Fortress. From all over the Reich, civilians, soldiers of the Wehrmacht, members of the SS, and Axis governments poured into this picturesque region, followed by special forces bringing secret documents, money, and valuables with them. At the end of the war, the population had quadrupled from 20,000 to 80,000. Journalist Walter Tara heard a lot about the period from his father and recalls events which took place at the beginning of March 1945, when the powerful chief of the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, and his subordinate Wilhelm Hüttl arrived at the Villa Carré.
Ja, das ist die berühmte Villa Carré.
Yes, this is the famous Villa Carré. It was the last refuge of the secret police leadership, the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, to which Kaltenbrunner retreated with Dr. Hüttl in the hope of reaching a separate peace with the Americans and continuing the war. Not of ending the war, but of continuing to fight against the Soviet Union. They said, yes, yes, we're Democrats. Suddenly they remembered Austria. Even Kaltenbrunner said, but I'm an Austrian. And Dr. Hüttl said, but I'm an Austrian. What have we got to do with the Germans? It was all the Germans. They were the bad guys. It was Hitler. And so on, you see. They still believed they could save their skins. The Ludendorff Bridge near Remagen was taken intact by the Americans on the 9th of March. An unexpected stroll across the Rhine for the American troops who were unaware of what lay ahead. The same day, American Secret Service Chief Allen Dulles sent President Roosevelt a secret memo informing him of an offer from Ernst Kaltenbrunner. It was Himmler's old plan: military support for the Americans in a war against the Soviet Union. He wished to discuss matters with Dulles in person, his emissary Wilhelm Hüttl said. Failing that, Kaltenbrunner threatened a bloody final battle at the Alpine Fortress. But Himmler waited for an answer in vain. Neither he nor Kaltenbrunner knew that behind their backs, SS Obergruppenführer Karl Wolff had secretly contacted the Americans. On the 9th of March, the American president had a second offer on his table, in addition to Kaltenbrunner's attempt at blackmail. Wolff, the highest-ranking SS officer in Italy and head of the German police there, wanted to end the pointless war and offered an unconditional surrender in the south. It sounded good, perhaps too good. Was it a trap? Allen Dulles counted on Wolff, but time was running out. Only 4 days later, Bern cabled that Wolff's activities had been discovered, and Kaltenbrunner had threatened him with catastrophic consequences. If Wolff were to succeed, Himmler's plans for the Alpine Fortress would have become worthless. Wolff's opponents pressured the Americans in Bern, in vain. They then informed Hitler of Wolf's solo attempt. Again in vain. Surprisingly, Hitler let Wolf continue, hoping to gain time. Himmler too was biding his time, convinced that the coalition of the Allies would break and that the Americans would then need him. Until then, he demonstrated cynical confidence, as here when awarding medals for hand-to-hand combat. On the 19th of March 1945, General Wolf met with Allen Dulles in the Villa Croce, a discreet location on Lake Maggiore. Although facing liquidation by Kaltenbrunner, Wolf risked everything and continued to offer unconditional surrender on the southern front. He spent hours explaining his plans, which he hoped would convince Generals Kesselring and Vietinghoff to join him. Allen Dulles was impressed by Wolf's determination. 3 days later, Dulles' report on Operation Sunrise, the code name for Wolf's plans, was cabled to Washington. It was euphoric, but alarming at the same time, Wolf having confirmed that the Alpine Fortress was no empty threat. A dramatic life-and-death struggle had begun. Operation Sunrise versus the Alpine Fortress. Wolf versus Kaltenbrunner. At Wolf's own suggestion, an Allied radio operator was smuggled into his headquarters in Fasano to keep in touch with the Americans. Meanwhile, in the Alps, arms production continued at top speed. Steyr-Puck's new underground factory was supposed to start production on May 1st, 1945, as promised by the General Director, SS Brigadeführer Georg Meindl. Right here in Tunnel B of the cement project was where the rockets Himmler and Kaltenbrunner dreamed of were to be built. But in spring 1945, the time for such dreams had passed. The war effort needed fuel and steel for the airplanes and tanks in the Alps. There was literally no room for the Missiles over New York project. Despite protests by the rocket scientists, priority was given to a refinery producing fuel from the nearby Austrian oil fields. We discovered the foundations of the refinery. These are probably remains of the distilling towers. The Ebensee refinery had been in full-scale production since February 1945. The components of the refinery had been dismantled from plants all over Europe and reassembled in Tunnel B. Now 8,000 tons of fuel were being produced every month, whilst rail transport along Lake Traunsee was becoming ever more dangerous. Without mercy, the SS forced prisoners to cut further tunnels into the rock. Just 2 weeks before the war finally ended, 2,000 more prisoners arrived from Mauthausen. The Alpine Redouille, or Alpine Fortress of the Germans. From mid-March on, the plans hung over the heads of Allied commanders. A dense network of military facilities stretching from the Bavarian Alps to the Salzkammergut and Tyrol as far as Vienna. Coal mines, iron ore mines, steel mills, chemical plants and explosive factories are minutely detailed. Even the underground plants at Ebensee, Steyr and St. Georgen, where secret weapons were suspected. Not even the little town of Zipf and the missile tests in the beer cellars had escaped their notice. Did the Allies still underestimate the danger of the Alpine Fortress? March the 28th, 1945, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied forces in Europe, took a dramatic decision. His troops had already reached Thuringia and were in a position to reach Berlin in a matter of days. Despite British Prime Minister Winston Churchill's protest, Eisenhower ordered them to march south, leaving Berlin to the Russians. The change in tactics soon became clear to the SS. The race for the south between Allied and German troops was now on. Feverishly, the SS concentrated its troops in the mountains, special forces, SS battalions fighting alongside Wehrmacht units, were ordered back from the front. Ministerial and headquarters staff were transferred from Berlin to the Alps. Himmler transferred command over the southern arena to Kaltenbrunner and ordered the evacuation of the concentration camps. On April the 7th, the first transport heading south left Buchenwald. Throughout the first weeks of April, SS General Kammler, responsible for jet fighter production, hurriedly toured the Alpine factories, trying to accelerate production of Me-262 fighters. Sections of highways were adapted for use as runways, as here at Esching near Munich. Hidden in forests nearby, the jets were supposed to surprise Allied fighters and regain supremacy in the air. But fuel was running out. Again, Kaltenbrunner sent Wilhelm Hüttel to Bern to meet with US intelligence. He spoke of Kaltenbrunner's influence on Hitler, of rapid progress in extending the Alpine Fortress, of troop relocation, special forces, and of the Steyr facilities turning out ever more weapons. A new secret weapon would be ready for deployment within days, he claimed. Was he bluffing, mere propaganda, or a deadly threat? Meanwhile, Operation Sunrise was in difficulty. Himmler continued to try to stop Wolf using all means. The wavering General Vietinghoff was only willing to surrender honorably. And when Wolf fell into the hands of Italian partisans, US Secret Services had to rescue him so as to save Operation Sunrise. Wolf implored the Americans not to undertake further offensives in the south, promising to hand northern Italy to them on a plate. In mid-April, Fritz Molden was flown to Allied headquarters in Caserta, southern Italy, where he had an unexpected meeting.
Da saßen noch ein paar amerikanische Offiziere, die auch mitgeflogen sind.
A couple of American officers who had been on the same flight were sitting there, and two gentlemen in civilian clothes, but you could see 5 meters away. They were German top brass, high-ranking German officers. They were out of uniform, but it was quite obvious, the way they spoke with each other and looked around contemptuously. It was clear to me then, though I hadn't known it before. They had sat at the front in the aircraft, and I'd been sitting somewhere else and hadn't spoken with either of them. Afterwards, my American friends told me, "You were at a historic occasion last week." They flew to Caserta for Wolf and Vietinghoff. They were both generals, one from the SS and the other from the Wehrmacht, and the representatives sent to sign the draft of the surrender.
Das Vorpapier für die Kapitulation zu unterschreiben.
The Americans marched fast, reaching the Danube and setting up a bridgehead at Dillingen. The same day, Bologna celebrated its liberation. The noose was tightening on all fronts. Wolf's surrender in Italy was imminent. The SS withdrawal to the Alps continued all the more hectically. Evacuation transports rolled continuously from the concentration camps to the Alps, reinforcements for the miserable masses in the labor camps. Hundreds died en route in air raids or starved or suffocated in the overcrowded wagons. By the end of April, the SS was running out of trains. The so-called death marches began. Shortly before the liberation of Dachau, almost 7,000 prisoners were forced to march to Tyrol, to the wind tunnel construction site in the Ötz Valley.
Am 26. April 1945.
On April the 26th, 1945, we didn't leave for work, and block by block, units of 100 men were assembled and ordered to march out towards the Alps, as we believed. We didn't know the precise destination. We had only heard that we were being sent to the Alps, to the Alpine Fortress. They were trying to build an Alpine Fortress, and that evening we left. It wasn't dark yet. We heard dogs barking, then shouting from the soldiers, from the SS.
Dann
Auf einmal sind sie also näher gekommen.
Suddenly they moved closer, and I thought to myself, this is your chance to take a photograph.
Ausgeschaut haben sie fürchterlich.
They look dreadful.
Ich hab sowas.
I've never seen anything like it. Dawn was breaking in Dachau when special prisoner Kunkel and his comrades were ushered onto waiting buses, destined for Reichenau, a special camp near Innsbruck.
Ich weiß noch, dass Pastor Niemöller zum Johannes Neuhaus dann sagte,
I remember Pastor Niemöller saying to Johannes Neuhäusler, "So, Johannes, we'll be leaving Dachau by the gate and not through the chimney." We went to South Tyrol, first to Innsbruck and then to South Tyrol. We believed the fighting would continue, that Hitler would retreat to Tyrol and fight to the last remaining bullet, and that the SS wanted to use us, hostages, as pawns to save their own lives. On the 8th of April, Kaltenbrunner had a special unit fetch one of the two groups of German nuclear research scientists from Stadt Ilm in Thuringia to Bad Tölz in Bavaria. With them, they brought laboratory equipment, secret documents, and radioactive material worth several $1 million. In the meantime, almost 500 of Werner von Braun's rocket scientists from Peenemünde had arrived near Oberammergau.
Da wir mit der Todesstrafe bedroht waren,
Since we were threatened with the death penalty, practically all of us went down there, and we even began to resume our work there.
wir haben sogar angefangen, dort wieder die Arbeit aufzunehmen. Es wurde allgemein angenommen, dass die SS...
It was generally assumed that the SS wanted to use von Braun and Dornberger's group of rocket scientists to bring about an end to the war more favorable to themselves.
besseren Abschluss des Krieges zu erreichen. Also wir waren im gewissen Sinne Geiseln.
In a sense, therefore, we were hostages, used by the SS leaders to gain better conditions for their surrender. The twilight of the gods in the Alpsee region. Along with headquarters and staff, Nazi leaders poured into the region, bringing with them crates of secret documents, looted gold and jewelry. Adolf Eichmann arrived in Alt-Aussee with 22 crates.
Es war in den letzten Kriegswochen. Hier war der Sender.
It was in the last weeks of the war. This was home to the radio station Oberdonau 2000, which practically belonged to Gauleiter Eigruber. It was from here that his exhortations to hold out were broadcast, claiming that the Alpine Fortress would be defended, that thousands of soldiers and SS special units were there to fight the final battle. He claimed it was just a matter of waiting for the miraculous new weapons and that the Third Reich would triumph. In the last weeks of the war, around the end of April, Eichmann went to see Kaltenbrunner at the Park Hotel Alt-Aussee to demand further orders. He was completely dependent on receiving orders and didn't want to act on his own. He didn't know what to do. And Dr. Hüttel said to Kaltenbrunner, "Listen, if they find Eichmann here with us, they'll hang us all. He's got to go." The chaos increased throughout the last weeks of April 1945. Columns of troops fleeing to the shelter of the Alps before the American advance. Trucks jammed the roads. Last-ditch forces were mobilized. The Volkssturm, sabotage troops, and members of the Waffen-SS were thrown together to form the SS Division Nibelungen. Their task? To block the valleys south of Munich.
Die Junker trafen in Tölz ein und wurden beauftragt.
The soldiers arrived in Tölz and were ordered to block the approaches to the mountains in the Isar and Riss valleys.
The
only spark of hope was the illusion that the Americans would fight the Russians.
Der Amerikaner gegen den Russen zu Felde ziehen würde. Wobei wir dann
we would have joined them straight away.
Mitgemacht hätten.
I prepare to sign on behalf of SS General Wolf, Supreme Commander of SS and Police.
The race was run. General Wolf surrendered to the Americans at his Bozen headquarters. Meanwhile, in Caserta's Palazzo Reale, representatives of the SS and the Wehrmacht signed an unconditional surrender in Italy. The days of the Alpine Fortress were numbered. That same day, a last offer from Kaltenbrunner reached headquarters in Caserta. He had attempted to anticipate Wolf. The telegram claimed that Kaltenbrunner himself was now leading the move to surrender. A last bluff? In fact, he had just ordered a new front to be opened and the roads leading north to be destroyed. He cabled Hitler on the very day of surrender in Italy that he would continue fighting and was planning food supplies for the future Alpine Fortress. Four days after leaving Dachau, the special prisoners arrived at the hotel Prague-Zawilce in the foothills of the Dolomites. Among them, the Bishop of Clermont-Ferrand, the Mayor of Vienna, the Dutch Minister van Dijk, Pastor Niemöller, and former Austrian Chancellor Schuschnigg. Their buses had become stranded in the Puster Valley. 2 days of chaos, the desperate fear of being executed if the mission failed. Then a miraculous liberation by Wehrmacht officers of all people, followed by the luxury of the hotel, which the owner made ready for them. Her granddaughter still keeps her grandmother's souvenirs of the time.
She
assigned rooms to the individual prisoners and made sure they were provided with the basic necessities. Payne Best, a British prisoner, built a radio transmitter on one of the balconies and made contact with the Americans. Room 222, the Schuschnigg's room. A few doors down the hall, their neighbors, Pastor Niemöller, Karl Kunkel, the Stauffenberg family. Anxious waiting for the Americans, countless rumors. No one knew where the front line was. On the 2nd of May, the surrender in the south took effect. The roads to the Alps were open. German soldiers went into captivity. Himmler had given the order not to open fire on American and British troops, but Kaltenbrunner refused to give up until the end. Scattered and fanatical SS units were to continue fighting into the first weeks of May. On the 4th of May, the Americans reached the Prague-Zawilce hotel. "We're liberated," former Austrian Chancellor Schuschnigg wrote in his diary. He had been held by the SS together with his wife and daughter. The Thyssens, General Holder, and Pastor Martin Niemöller had reached the end of their nightmare. Werner von Braun was to continue his career in the USA and help the Americans reach the moon. Hitler had committed suicide on the 30th of April. Himmler too escaped justice by taking poison. Kaltenbrunner was convicted at Nuremberg and hanged. His accomplice, Wilhelm Hüttel, testified against him, thus saving his own neck. Eichmann and many of his accomplices disappeared to Latin America. The Jewish prisoner Adolf Burger and his comrades were liberated, but not free from the burden of memory. The traces of those times can still be found by those who look for them.